Well, good morning, good afternoon. We're thrilled to have you back with us today. We're excited to be together. We're off camera talking about all sides of the book of Revelation. We just love this book. And we're happy that you're with us. If you're new to us, this is GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises on the book of Revelation. I'm Pastor Dan Smith at Garden Grove down in Orange County. Viana is our children's pastor at Calamasa. And we just were talking. She's working on her MDiv over at La Sierra University. And Dr. Jon Paulien, really the guru of Revelation studies around the world in the Adventist Church. We are very, very lucky to have him here.
And I was just thinking, you know, the title of our program is God's Prophetic Surprises. And I was thinking the greatest surprise of all would be someone who understands the trumpets. A lot of people think they do.
Yes.
But, yeah.
I'm going to give just a small testimonial. In our last show, we were talking about some things that Jon has written, and he particularly referred to a book called The Deep Things of God. And I was about 3 seconds from clicking on the key in Amazon. I said, maybe I should go look and be sure. Sure enough, I had it. I thought everything that Jon had written, except maybe the dissertation. So anyway, I have gotten through most of it over the weekend. Not complete, but I have gotten through most of it. And I just want to encourage you, if you're a Revelation person, this is 2004. I think I looked at the copyright. Mm-hmm. And it seems to reflect some of what is in the 7 keys. You know, some of that is in here too, right? The dual directionality, and some of that is in here.
Well, the first section of 7 keys is kind of a summary of that book, very, very brief.
Okay.
So that would be familiar. Yeah.
But this has really a broad value because it covers really how you do study of the Bible and what we call hermeneutics, and what are the tools and how we do this. How do we handle an Ellen White? How do you do verbal studies? And it's just good stuff. And we should have all read it before you and I got into the class, into our TV show. So I just want to put a little note in for that. Really, it would help all people who are studying the Bible in general and Revelation and Daniel in particular.
If you don't mind my just interjecting there, what I think is the critical part of chapter 2 is particularly significant. Because I think people love to get into the book of Revelation with the idea, I want to know what's going to happen in the future. I want us to go to an unfulfilled prophecy and solve it and then be ready ahead of time. And I think that's a strong motive that people have. The interesting thing is very few people have entered that task with the knowledge of how prophecy does get fulfilled.
Right.
There's a whole Bible full of fulfilled prophecies. And so chapter 2 is just comparing God's prediction with the outcome. And when you do that, it changes the whole thing. And I think, some of the issues that I've gotten into with people through the years on Revelation is people who haven't done that. They see the future here so clearly, but it might be a future that the Bible itself never envisioned. And you see that in the Pharisees. There's books, ancient books, that Jews wrote about last day events and all the order of those events and all the messianic signs and stuff. They had it all down, and when the Messiah came, they rejected him.
Right. Wow.
So he was rejected by prophetic students.
No.
And that's something to really keep in mind. That's why I wrote that chapter 2, because I just thought it was revolutionary to realize that unless we understand how God moves from prophecy to fulfillment, we will create our own story of fulfillment and think we got the Bible.
That's right. That's right.
You were going to say, Viana.
So how would you walk with someone who takes a very literal standpoint and and thinks that if there are certain prophecies that are not going to be fulfilled the way they think, therefore they have permission to disqualify the Bible or to think that all of it might be in question? How would you walk someone through that?
Oh, I'm actually dealing with that right now. I have a friend who is very skeptical about prophecy, not because he doesn't appreciate God or the church or anything, but he's a scientist and he's into hard data. And he wrote me and said, can you help me to see, show me a single prophecy fulfillment that is absolutely convincing on the basis of the data. Just give me one, And I sent him chapter 2 of the book because there's a whole bunch of them there. And then I thought about it afterward. And I said, that won't do it either. I said, the unspoken basis for chapter 2 and for all of my work is, number one, that God is real and that he communicates to us in the Bible. And number two, that God knows something at least about the future and is willing to communicate that in the Bible. And I said to him, if you don't hold those convictions or are not even open to the possibility that they might be true, I said, nothing I just sent you will be of any use, of any value. So I think we have to realize that students of prophecy are operating with a presupposition that there is a God, that he communicates in the Bible, and that he knows the future. And somebody who's skeptical about those basic points will find all of these conversations a waste of time.
That's right, that's right,
Sure.
that's right.
So, those who are viewing, if you're skeptical about what goes on this show, I don't blame you if that's where your background has brought you, but I would encourage you to pick up the Bible with a prayer in your heart and just say, God, I'm not sure you're out there. I don't know exactly who you are, but people tell me this is your word. If that's really true, would you open it to me? Would I find you in this word? And I believe he'll do that.
Wow.
Amen.
But if you don't do that, then you're likely to end up a skeptic on these issues because that's easy to do.
Well, just to speak, at my age of 40 years in a ministry, I have been to many preachers who were doing public meetings, who wanted their sermons to be relevant and the signs of the times, read the newspaper, saw things going on in the world, and then preached out of that. And it's all old news now, and it's way past Falkland Islands crisis, oil crisis. Every war was now the new Armageddon. And we've had a lot of 100 years of those kinds of embarrassments. We had preachers at Y2K, the year 1999, preaching all over Adventism in America, filled the gym at La Sierra University where I'm at. I was a senior pastor, and I opposed him. But he was going all over and sold books everywhere that Christ was going to come somewhere around the year 2000 because of the 6,000 years and then the 7,000-year millennium and the Jubilee cycles. We're 2019. He was wrong. See, he hasn't sold one book since then.
Well, and he himself said, because I think I asked him, I think I know who you're talking about. I asked him, I said, how much past 2000 would it need to go before you'd conclude that you'd made a mistake? And he thought for a bit, and he says, probably 2020. If we're still here in 2020, I'll realize that this was all a crock. And I appreciated the fact that he had an end game. He wasn't just saying, I'm going to be right. Because I do know people who have predicted various dates, and they just keep recycling and coming back for more. And several of those write me on a regular basis. And
I had a group come from your church where you are now. I don't know if they're still there. This is 20 years ago.
Oh, yes.
But the year before 2000, they came to my office, and 3 of them came. Beautiful men, lovely people. I think they had been consigned to the kitchen at your church. They weren't allowed to be in a regular, but they had to teach in the kitchen. But they were very sure from the Jubilee
later on
cycles.
The attic.
What's that?
Later on the attic.
In the attic?
Did you know did you even know there's an attic like about 4 floors
It's not my
up?
office.
There's history there, Viana.
Tell me more.
And that Jesus was coming, by the year 2000, maybe 2003. I said, what about the text that says we don't know the day and the hour? We don't know the day and the hour, but we can know the season. And so on and so on and so on. And that God was going to finally finish the work. He wasn't going to worry about us doing it anymore. He was going to himself finish the work. I said, if God is going to choose the time arbitrarily, then why didn't he do it a couple thousand years ago? Before we had the Black Plague and World War II and 20 million Russians killed and all the rest. That makes God responsible If he's choosing the time on his own, he's responsible for all the suffering up until when he comes. And I said, God is never arbitrary. And I got a couple of them to say, maybe we better go back and look at this again, because I just didn't agree with that. But if you're not careful, you can become cynical because of how we have abused prophecy and made claims that were not accurate, and go the other way and said, none of it's true. So we're hopefully in the middle somewhere.
Well, I've got another prophetic surprise then for this program.
What's that?
For those of you that were wondering, you know, Viana looks very fit and all the rest of that. Now we know. Her office is up in the attic, up, down all day.
3 flights of stairs.
Yeah, so exercise is a wonderful thing. Sometimes you get it by accident without meaning
That's
to.
right.
Just a little introduction. We want to now get to the text. We thought off camera, maybe we'd take a couple minutes and quickly review the 4 trumpets we've studied so far, which do kind of go as a group. The 4 trumpets and then the 3 woes. And perhaps kind of get us a little big picture of where you see these 4 going, Jon. I did a little work between the last time we taped and now. Maybe we can talk about that. So go ahead.
Okay, well, when you talk about the first 4 trumpets, there basically have been, among Seventh-day Adventists, at least 2 major views. One view associated with Uriah Smith basically sees the first 4 trumpets as movies of history, in his case. In other words, these 4 trumpets are describing scenes. The prophet saw the scene, didn't know quite how to describe it, and used this dramatic language to describe those scenes. And if you look in history, you can find various tribes that helped conquer the Roman Empire, and you could tie these things in with specific scenes of history. Okay? That's a very, very popular view, has been among Seventh-day Adventists for a long time. An offshoot of that view is an idea I think, Dan, you've expressed at least in part from time to time, and that's the idea these were not a movie of the fall of the Roman Empire, but they're a movie of our future, that they're still yet to come. Yeah. We don't understand them because they haven't happened yet. And the reason that I and many others have stepped away from that view is I don't find any evidence that that's how God works. I don't know of any biblical fulfilled prophecy in the Bible that is a movie of the future. And there you have it exactly seen. Look at the messianic prophecies. They're not a movie of the future. You know, he'll be a king like David. He'll be a prophet like Moses. He'll be a priest like Aaron and Melchizedek. That gives you a range of possibilities, but it isn't a movie of the future ahead of time. You know, it isn't God just saying, okay, it already happened to me, now here it is. So because of that, and I actually didn't sort of make that conscious judgment. It's just as a student, I said, well, let me study the trumpets. Let me try to understand the text. Let me understand the Old Testament allusions and all that. And over time, I came to see more and more that, like Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, the trumpets use symbolic language to describe something that has not yet happened. But it is not a direct one-by-one correspondence kind of a thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not completely there yet, Jon. Help me understand. Because Bible prophecy does say this general idea would come, you know, Cyrus would come to deliver. So when you say it's not a movie, but it does say things that are going to happen, tease that apart a little farther.
It also said that when Cyrus comes, God will send an east wind to dry up the Euphrates River so God's people can escape across that riverbed in their sandals. Not a bit of that actually happened. The prophecy was fulfilled, but that didn't happen. So there's details. So the name Cyrus is there, absolutely. But when you read chapter 2, you realize that while God is consistent, and many details do get fulfilled, he's also unpredictable, and he can do new things and can surprise you. Remember God's prophetic surprises. God can surprise you, and if you think for the prophecy you've got it all figured out ahead, you're likely to be disappointed.
So by movie of the future, you mean it's a little less specific than that. Ron did get scenes of the future, but they're not tied to everything happening, cars driving here on a certain
Well,
day.
is Daniel 2 a scene of the future? There's not a bit of that that's a scene of the future. It's a symbolic vision. There's a statue and different metals and stuff like that, and a stone that turns into a mountain. This is very dramatic, cartoon-like language.
Okay.
And that's the difference. Movie of the future is just a way of saying God saw the actual events ahead of time and showed the prophet that. So the prophet's watching the Roman Empire fall, and the prophet is watching, Sunday law or whatever else, etc. But the text itself doesn't really say that.
Okay, fair enough.
And when you look at the language of the text in the light of Scripture, when you read it in the light of the whole Bible, 66 books, I think it gets further and further away.
Okay, good.
So as I've studied the trumpets and seen how they're used in the Old Testament and also in the New Testament, that led me and a number of other people. I was not the first to see it that way, but as I studied the trumpets, I came to see them in a certain way and then discovered other people had come to the same conclusion. The earliest person within the Adventist Church is Edwin R. Thiele, who was a predecessor of mine at the seminary back in the 40s and 50s. And he came up with the view, roughly, of what I'm going to share with you, and that's that the first trumpet depicts the fall of Jerusalem, AD 70. The second trumpet, the fall of Rome, maybe 4 centuries later. The third trumpet depicts, in a sense, the fall of the church. That the church, which had been designed by God to be a faithful witness to the world, had now distorted the gospel, and that's where you have the poisoned waters, etc. And then the fourth trumpet is a period of darkness that follows. For Thiele and others, that darkness would be like the Middle Ages, the so-called Dark Ages. It kind of, it's evocative, if nothing else. I would more see the difference. A poisoning of water would be taking the gospel and distorting it, whereas eclipse, you're not distorting the gospel, you're just ignoring it. You're cutting it off from people's view. And so it's two different attacks on the gospel in the third and fourth trumpet. So that's how I look at that. And I think when we had the Daniel and Revelation committee years ago, there was no unanimity on how to read the trumpets. There were a lot of people who wanted to stay with Uriah Smith. I would say maybe a small majority were happy with where I was going. And I would have to say, as a scholar, I would have to say my view of the trumpets is the best that I can come up with, and it's based on decades of study, original languages, back and forth in Scripture, looking for the larger principles of how prophecy works. With all that in view, this is the best view, I think, available.
And no problem. I agree with the vast majority of what you have said. I have a couple questions I'd like to hear you comment on. If we had never heard of the book of Daniel, so we didn't have those sweep of history around us, would we still have come up, just from Revelation alone, with the idea that churches and the seals and the trumpets sweep over a couple thousand years? Mm-hmm. If we hadn't had the template from Daniel.
I don't know that I've ever heard that question before, so I like it. But I would say no. If Daniel didn't exist, Revelation would mean something different than it does. The reality is Daniel did exist, and in the very first verse, the author tells you that this will be a signified book like Daniel 2. We went through that many moons ago at the beginning of this show. And so taking that cue, Daniel 2 does become a model for at least some parts of Revelation. And the trumpets would be one of those in my view.
Just reading this article again that was in the Adventist Review by Rodriguez, that seems to be sort of the logic, is that Daniel is apocalyptic prophecy, Daniel is historicist, Revelation is apocalyptic like that, therefore it is historicist. Are there other compelling arguments besides that? Or do we just accept that this is one genre and this is that genre? It does historical. Sweet.
Yes, well, I've engaged a number of scholars outside the Adventist communion who believe that Daniel was written after the fact. That Daniel was written maybe 4 or 5 centuries after the time described in the book, and he was giving history after the fact. In other words, the prophecies of Daniel are accurate because the Daniel writing them, whoever that was, is writing with the knowledge of history in mind. And he puts it in Daniel's mouth 5 centuries before, and here, look at that, it all fits, you see. So that's called by the scholars ex eventu prophecy after the event, you see. And so I'm reasoning with these folk and saying, how do you get around that? And I noticed that they all feel that Revelation is genuine prophecy, but that he was wrong. Okay? And so the argument that I gave, in addition to the Daniel one, the argument that I gave is that the existence of Jewish apocalyptic tells us that the Jews and the early Christians believed that God knows the future and that God would be capable of giving the future to a genuine prophet. And if John is a genuine prophet and God spoke to him, then this is genuine prophecy and needs to be taken seriously as such. And that's something I put out in scholarly literature, engaging some of those folk. And these are honest people, they have a scientific mindset, and they say, look, all these Jewish books are prophecy after the fact. And how do you know? Well, because the prophecy all fits until this point, and then it turns to mush. And that's how you know when the book was written. Because it's all accurate till here, now it turns to mush. This guy was writing history after the fact, and when he went to prophecy, everything fell apart.
Yeah, no longer made sense.
And you can see that in the Jewish apocalyptic books. Yeah.
Second question I have for you. If we accept historicism, starting with the fall of Jerusalem, there were many eras of darkness. There's been plenty of eras when people lost the track. And around the world, people had no Bible, no God, no religion, of revealed religion. How do we know that this particular time period and this particular place is the correct fulfillment rather than some other darkness over in the world?
Well, when we get to Revelation 13, that's certainly a question we can come back to. But it seems to me there's only been one time in history when the representative of Christianity for the whole world, the representative of Christianity kind of lost its way. And that's not some Protestant attacking the Catholic Church. There were Catholic scholars, big names, Francis of Assisi, Eberhard of Salzburg, and others, who within the Middle Ages said the church had lost its way. That was before Luther, etc. Nicholas de Lyra, I think, is another one. You have a number of people, Joachim and others, who said, things are not quite where they're supposed to be. These are not the best times. So you have a time, and that's not to say that there's evil all and forever. It's saying in the Middle Ages the church lost its way. It's evident. Even popes more recently have been apologizing for those days.
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
that's right.
So it's not someone trying to attack, but simply to say, I think God saw that as a poster child.
No.
Here's what happens when you lose track of the gospel. The consequences are horrible. And the purpose of that is not to attack the Catholic Church or to attack Catholics. The purpose is that I don't get stupid and do the same thing.
No.
Somebody who makes a mistake the first time, you can stumble into it. But once you got all those examples, you'd better not repeat. So we're the ones that are called into judgment by such passages.
I use a little metaphor. I said, if you were driving in a car and you closed your eyes and took your hands off the wheel, how long would it take for the car to begin to go off the track? If you have no Bible for 1,000 years and you can't read it, you don't have access to it, it's not in a language that you can read, there's no way to buy one, you know, why would we blame these people? We now have the Bible available to self-correct constantly. They had nothing to be able to say, oh boy, I got off here a little bit. So let's be a little careful about this. Printing press wasn't invented until the 1490s. Now, finally, you can correct and say, oh, we got off the road a little bit here. See? So, understand. So just to summarize then, from the fall of Jerusalem, we begin to have the drift. By the third trumpet, we're beginning to have serious drift from truth. By the fourth trumpet, we now are moving into secular atheism and all the using the symbol from Exodus 5, where the Pharaoh said, who was God that I should deal with him? Yeah. And Egypt is a symbol of this.
You see, there were two reactions to the Middle Ages. One reaction was the Reformation. We got to fix the church, get it back where it was supposed to be. The other reaction is Renaissance, Enlightenment, secularism. It's just saying, clearly religion is not the way. Let's find a better way, and they usually find it in science.
Yeah.
As the better way to truth. Yeah.
I don't know if you have listened to TED Talks. Have you listened to TED Talk, Atheism 2.0?
I have not. Yeah.
Interesting, you know, very interesting. There's another program I listened to last year. They took 5 different religions and put little TED Talks together. There's a comedian, a lady, who goes around telling her story, and Adventists are in the story, coming to her house. Jehovah's Witnesses coming to her house. She makes it hilarious. And by the time you listen to her, religion does sound ridiculous in the mouths of the people that she got it from. Yeah. And 1/4 of America now says none when they say, what is your religion? None. So we're down some of these paths still today. You know.
I want to ask Viana, you know, your generation, when they see texts like the Trumpets and see people just back and forth and they can't kind of, you know, what impact does that have? You see, you know, younger people and your generation and below. How are they responding to these challenges?
Well,
we have about a minute, so just, you know.
I know definitely when I see this back and forth, I have to ask myself, if there is no conclusion, then it's not worth my time. Then if too many people are disagreeing, then there is truth elsewhere. And you get that because you have, after 1,000 years of not having a Bible in some areas, now you have too much information. And so we are naturally drawn to what is clear cut, where it has answers that make sense to our truth today.
So what's the solution? My suggestion is spend the majority of your time on the clearer texts of Scripture.
Right.
But because people are interested in the trumpets, we're going to handle them here anyway.
Let's do it.
We're going to find some good in it.
Please.
I hope you begin to find some summary here that we have tried to look at that. And so the next show we will go on to wrap up the fourth trumpet and be ready to go to one of the great challenges of the Bible, and exciting, and I hope you'll enjoy it, to the fifth trumpet as we get into Revelation chapter 9. Thanks for being with us today. God bless you all.